Ah yes, another top 10 list to delight your earballs. Last week we poked some fun at some seriously ugly bikes, but today we're feeling in a patriotic sort of mood, and as such we've assembled a list of the top 10 American motorcycles to own. These aren't necessarily the fastest or the flashiest bikes coming out of the good old US of A, but rather the motorcycles that are the easiest to live with, that respect your money, and are the least likely to leave you stranded on the side of the road, because let's face it, this is a list with more than two Harleys on it, so you're probably going to need to bust out that toolkit more than once. A few rules for today. The bikes can be used, which means that Buells and discontinued models can appear, and second, they must be from an actual manufacturer, so no custom houses like Orange County Choppers or Revival Cycles can count. Now, I've ordered the list by manufacturer, and while the bikes themselves don't appear in any order, the manufacturers do, since some of them are inherently better than others. Let's dive right in with our worst manufacturer to buy from, Arch Motorcycles. Now, if I'm smart, I've plastered the entire screen with sad Keanu memes right now, but unfortunately, Arch Motorcycles is the worst American manufacturer to buy from because they have literally no dealer network. And no, getting to meet Keanu Reeves does not make up for that. However, they have some really cool motorcycles, chiefly the KRGT1, which is coincidentally my dream bike, which is as unobtainable for me as your crush is for you. But hey, a guy can dream, right? Now, I know some people are wondering why I included such a small brand of bikes in here when I didn't include Revival or something like that, but the reason is simple. They actually build their own motorcycles, and you can peruse the available models on their website. If you fork over $80,000 or thereabouts, you get yourself one handcrafted motorcycle based on a 124 cubic inch S&S power plant. And yeah, it's cubic inches today, boyos. These are American bikes. It's basically like a Harley twin cam, but it's good, and it makes a claim to 121 foot-pounds of torque. It's fast as hell and features adjustable Öhlins in the front and rear, carbon fiber wheels, 6-pin ISR calipers, a 6-speed gearbox, which, as we'll discuss later, is a bit of a rarity among American bikes. The best way to think of the KRGT1 is if an R1 and a Sportster had a baby. Also, Keanu, if you're watching this, can I ride one, please? I really want to ride one. Moving on to America's sport bike company, the long maligned but cult classic Buell motorcycles. Yes, technically they were a division of Harley-Davidson for a while, but Buell's been building bikes forever, so I'm going to consider them their own thing. Now, Buells are basically Sportster motors, but hopped up a little bit and put in a frame that can turn, which is good, but Harley has officially stopped servicing Buell motorcycles, which means that you either need to find a local shop and pay for service, or you have to do it yourself. That alone makes Buell less desirable and why they're so low on today's list. But if you're looking for a Buell, which one should you get? Well, if you fancy a naked sport bike with a V-twin note, it's hard to go wrong with the M2 Cyclone. It ran from 97 to 02, and while pretty much every Japanese naked bike is better, there's certainly a lot of cachet in saying that you own a Buell. The Cyclone featured an air-cooled 37 cubic inch engine putting down 94 horsepower and 83 foot-pounds of torque. It weighed under 500 pounds wet and ready to ride, and it featured adjustable shows in the front and rear. Again, it's not the fastest thing out there, but for an American sport naked bike, the M2 is a solid choice. It's fast off the line, makes a solid amount of power for the street, and apart from the fact that it's carbureted, it's certainly better than any modern offering from HD or Indian. But maybe you're feeling something a little bit more relaxed than the Cyclone. Well, the S3 Thunderbolt was Buell's answer to sport touring. It was basically a fatter Cyclone. It featured the same 73 cubic inch engine, but this bike made 101 horsepower and 66 foot-pounds of torque, making it a little more gentle around town. It also had a wider seat, bigger front fairing, and inverted, fully adjustable show of forks. The bike is a bit heavier at 515 pounds, as you might expect from a bike designed to go on longer rides, and this bike was fuel injected, which means there's fewer headaches. The only problem with this as a sport tourer is that it has only 5 gears, and the Harley Sportster engine basically tapped out around 80 miles an hour on the highway. It's better as a commuter than a touring bike, but it still makes for a good choice if you want something from a more niche company company. Moving on, we have a more mainstream manufacturer, Victory Motorcycles. I've talked about them before, but for those of you who are unaware, here's the short recap of their history. They started out in the 80s making cool, fast-looking cruisers, and they were acquired by Polaris, who owned Indian, and like any responsible parent, Polaris put its two children in a ring with a rusty spoon and wanted to see who came out on top. Victory made better motorcycles, but the Indian brand name sold more bikes, so Polaris chucked good old Victory in the dumpster in a textbook case of modern irony. In much the same way as Buell, you can no longer buy new Victories nor get them serviced by a dealership, so you better know a guy or be good with a wrench. But if you can stomach that, you're in for a treat with these bikes. They're thoroughly modern engines with solid components, and they make more power than anything you'll find on an Indian lot. Starting us off from Victory, we have the Hammer 8-Ball. Now, the 8-Ball suffix typically refers to a fully blacked out bike, which you'd want for your fancy-pantsy looking muscle cruiser. And muscly this was. It had a big ol' 106 cubic inch air and oil-cooled V-twin engine putting down 110 foot-pounds of torque. Helping you put power to the ground was a massive 250 section rear tire, which is standard fare on muscle cruisers and stretched Busas. It's also got that elusive 6th gear I keep talking about, which means it's not going to shake your eyeballs loose while you ride, like certain other motorcycles that I've ridden. Dyna. Sorry, I had something in my throat right there. Now, while its suspension isn't the best with preload only in the rear and no adjustability up front, its inverted setup does help it perform a bit better than certain other motorcycles I've ridden before. Dyna. Sorry, I think something's in the air today. But this is an American list, right? So there's gotta be at least one chopper on here, and you'd be right. Victory saw fit to build a chopper-style bike straight from the factory, but unlike the Honda Fury, the Victory Vegas Jackpot actually makes sense to me. Now, admittedly, it's not as raked out as the Fury, but owning a Japanese chopper is like owning a German sombrero. There's something kinda off about the whole thing. It's not as authentic, to use a more hipster-appropriate parlance. The Jackpot version of the Vegas comes with chrome wheels, painted flames, and a big-ass rear tire. Now, for the next part, when I emphasize it with volume, that means it's in capital letters. The Jackpot is a 100 cubic inch Freedom V-twin. It's not just custom, it's Victory custom, straight from the factory. Yeah, it was all in capital letters. More importantly, that Freedom V-twin made 106 foot-pounds of torque, which is good, but it does weigh a gargantuan 700 pounds wet and ready to ride. Also, according to a buddy of mine who lowered his Vegas a little, the frame drags really easily. But you're not meant to hit the twisties on your chopper, right? You're meant to cruise down the main street of your town looking like a total badass. And now we finally get to an American motorcycle manufacturer that still makes motorcycles. Though the way things are going right now, who knows how long they'll stay in the game. Yep, we're talking about Harley-Davidson, and shock horror, they're not at the top of my list of American bike makers. Now, why is that, I hear you think as you're scratching your head? Well, this is where I have to acknowledge the YouTube comment section's favorite refrain about Harley. Yesterday's bikes at tomorrow's prices. Harleys are practically ancient motorcycles, and they charge more than Ducati does, which is saying a lot. However, they don't exactly make the best motorcycles, but they do have a massive dealer network, and no matter where you go in the world, the bar and shield is one of the most recognizable logos. They aren't my number one manufacturer, simply because their bikes aren't great from the factory, but if you want a cruiser with a ton of character, look no further. But what's the bike to buy? There's approximately like 40 bikes with the word Glide shoehorned into the name. If only someone could make sense of this for me. The best place to start is the Street Glide. Aside from the Sportster, it's probably one of the most popular motorcycles Harley makes. It's the entry-level big bike with an iconic batwing fairing that pretty much everyone has been ripping off for years. The base model features a 107 cubic inch air-cooled V-twin engine putting down 111 foot-pounds of torque, but it does weigh in at 829 pounds, so it's really not fast at all. However, it would be remiss of me not to mention the Screaming Eagle upgrades you can put on, which go all the way out to 131 cubes and have a factory warranty, and that can make the bike move really quick. But if you're doing that to your Street Glide, you're kinda missing the point. The Street Glide is for the guy who wants to chill at 70 miles an hour for 9 hours straight on his way to Sturgis, and there's basically no bike better than the Street Glide at doing that, assuming you don't count the Goldwing. Next up from Harley is the V-Rod Night Rod, which is my pick for a go-fast Harley. Are there faster Harleys? Yes. Do they handle better? Yes. Are they as cool as the Night Rod is? Nope, not even close. The V-Rod was a bike co-developed between Harley-Davidson and Porsche to be a bad-to-the-bone muscle bike. The Night Rod variant features a 76 cubic inch liquid-cooled V-twin engine. It was a big enough departure to have Harley making a liquid-cooled engine at the time, but it was also a 60-degree V-twin compared to the usual 45. It made 123 horsepower, 86 foot-pounds of torque, and while it does weigh north of 670 pounds, it can definitely boogie. The best part about the Night Rod is that while it technically is discontinued, you can still get it serviced and still buy genuine Harley-Davidson parts for it. Finally, from the motor company, we have the XR1200, which was famously a sales flop, but a cult hit. It's packing basically the same engine as the Buell M2 Cyclone from earlier, but it does have pure Harley styling, especially in the orange colorway. This was the closest thing that Harley's ever made to a sport bike, making 91 horsepower and 74 foot-pounds of torque, but its Achilles heel was its weight at 580 pounds wet. It's got Showa suspension, dual discs, and fuel injection. The only major oversight was a belt drive and a lack of 6th gear, which means no 6-gar energy for you. Now, these bikes are getting rarer by the day, and they're never coming back, so if you want one, you best go get one now. Now, before I move on from Harley-Davidson, I need to mention our giveaway Iron 883. We're planning some big mods for it coming up in October, and if you want to help us pick those out, or you want to sign up to win, you gotta click the link down below and head over to YammieNoob.co. You can get entered for free or sign up to support this series and you'll get access to our Discord server, weekly live streams, and exclusive content. If you like what we do and you want to support us, this is the best way to do it. Finally, we arrive at the #1 motorcycle manufacturer in America, Indian. But why? Because they're basically Harleys but made modern. Indian has been trying for years and years and years to outshine Harley-Davidson, and their fans are absolute diehards. If you thought HD riders were insufferable, imagine one of those guys but with a chip on their shoulder and something to prove. Honestly, I really don't care too much about Indian motorcycles aside from the FTR, mostly because they're kinda soulless motorcycles. There's very little about Indian other than the name that's survived its numerous closings and acquisitions. If Victory was still making bikes, they'd be here in the top slot. But if you're so inclined as to buy an Indian, I've got 2 bikes for you to check out. First is the Scout 60, and yes, I'm recommending the smaller bike with less power. The reason why is because it's the most classic motorcycle that Indian makes. It's got the looks of an old-school American cruiser. It's only got 5 gears and a 60 cubic inch water-cooled engine making 78 horsepower and 65 foot-pounds of torque. It's definitely the Sportster killer with a higher revving, higher compression engine that makes more power, and it won't melt your fancy Alpine Stars boots if you ride it like a sport bike. It's also not going to vibrate like a drying machine with a brick in it. It just so happens to be one of the cheapest new motorcycles you can buy from an American manufacturer, starting at only $8,999, which is the same price as an Iron 883. The only other bike I could recommend taking a look at from Indian is the FTR 1200. It's based on the 72 cubic inch Scout motor, but it features taller suspension, semi-knobby flat track style tires, and it's almost sporty. The FTR 1200 makes 120 horsepower and 85 foot-pounds of torque, weighs in at about 540 pounds, which means it's slower than the middleweight class of naked bikes, but if you want a sporting motorcycle from the showroom, the FTR is really your only choice. It just so happens not to suck, which helps.
Now how you doing, partner? This video's over, but you click on this one right over here, you keep watching yourself some Yammie Noob. Maybe I bend my boost on this one, maybe I'll give you some other funny memes or something like that. You might not know if you watch the video, so watch the video now, alright?